Hello, this is Meet the Writers. I'm Georgina Godwin. My guest today is an Australian comedy actress, author, singer and LGBT rights advocate. She's known to Australia as Sharon in Kath and Kim and to the world as the beloved Esme Hoggett in the Babe film series and Miss Viola in the Happy Feet films. In 2015, she released a memoir, Reckoning, which features her father, who was a World War II Polish resistance assassin and deals with themes of intergenerational trauma and struggles with her own sexuality. The book won the Douglas Stewart Prize for Non-Fiction and Book of the Year and Biography of the Year at the Australian Book Industry Awards. Her children's series, To Me, the Ticked-Off Pony, follows an audacious pony up to no good and has met with critical acclaim globally. In 2019, she was appointed an officer in the General Division of the Order of Australia, that's AO, for distinguished service to the performing arts as an actor, comedian and writer, and as a campaigner for marriage equality. Magda Szubanski, welcome to Meet the Writers. Magda, this is not the first time we've spoken, and I need to just explain to people where we are to sort of figure out this background noise. So we're on the rooftop of this ultra-hip hotel in downtown Melbourne. So you can hear cicadas, you can hear perhaps a little bit of music, people splashing in the pool, I don't know, the wind.
Singing.
But here you are.
Trams. No, a very distinctive Melbourne feature, the screech of the tram.
But it's lovely to be back here and it's lovely to talk to you. Now, the last time we spoke, it was about your book, Reckonings, which was your autobiography and really looked into your background and your mother. And just remind us of that book.
Well, really, it was sort of one of the early books about intergenerational trauma. It came out in 2015 when it wasn't such a buzzword. And it was very much about my father and his... I sound like a fantasist when I say it, but short way of saying it, he was an assassin in a top-secret counterintelligence unit in the Polish resistance. And what I wanted to explore in the book is, I think it's really a missing piece of the puzzle of, within the Jewish community, they'll speak about rescuers, but what the specific kind of species of trauma that comes through, not from people who were directly in the Holocaust, but who sort of tried to save people from the flames of the Holocaust, because my entire family hid Jewish people throughout the war, smuggled guns into the ghetto. This is in Warsaw. And that there's a cost of courage as well. And so really it was me coming to terms with what, and I still am, what that legacy is, what courage is. Do I have the kind of altruism that my fat Polish grandmother Jadwiga had? All of that. And how did it even stretch its tentacles all the way across from Europe to Australia? When you'd think, it would be so attenuated by the time it got here that it wouldn't matter, but no, it still impacts.
Absolutely. I'm a huge believer in that kind of epigenetics, really, that the intergenerational trauma. And you also in the book go into your own life and sort of being an unhappy child, a teen, coming to terms with your sexuality and just trying to find your way in life.
Well, I think there was a lot of things, like when we came here, because I was born in Liverpool, so there's a little rule of thumb, which is that when you go to, as Australians, when you go to America, your IQ goes up by 20 points. As an Australian, when you go to the UK, it goes down by 20 points. And then when you say, no, I was born in the UK, it goes up by 50. And then you say, no, I was born in Liverpool, it goes right back down again. So I can't quite win. So we came here when I was 5, so I've been here a very long time, and even so I've never heard of this hotel or even this laneway. This Melbourne and its laneways, it's known for its laneways. Yeah, we don't have the harbour, but we've got good coffee. So really it was sort of a whole thing about basically the build-up to me coming out live on national television, having been in people's lounge rooms via films like Babe and the show Kath and Kim as Sharon for 30-odd years. And then, everyone I knew that I was gay, but there's a whole other next level thing of coming out on national television. But it was also in the shadow of both that courage, but also I think there's a real European thing of a knowledge of the mob and that sort of... It's weird to be someone who's pretty famous in this country when I have... the mob terrifies me, But in a way, maybe I was trying to actually confront my fears. So the book is very much about my journey of finding my own personal courage in the shadow of the extraordinary courage of my family.
But I mean, you have found that courage, because what you've turned into is this enormous activist. I mean, this huge fighter for rights, for gay rights in particular here in Melbourne and for the entire country.
Weirdly, yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it, that I have sort of become quite obsessed with the virtues and how they work, and it really is a constellation. And it's like Aristotle says, bravery is a verb, that it's in the doing of it, the practice of it, that when you do it, you get better at it. But it's quite weird, because I've come full circle back, because, when I was 18, 19, I worked in a women's refuge for 2 years, and I was physically really quite brave then. There were some really life-threatening situations. So that wasn't the issue for me. It was rejection, I think, sort of social ostracism was a different kind of thing. So it's funny. I mean, I don't think of myself really as brave. I think you're brave in certain situations. You have your good and your bad days. I've done studies into it. It's no one set thing, I think. It's always about getting the constellation of things, so that if you're just, being brave but you're not judicious, then that's foolhardy, isn't it? And which was my criticism my mother had of my father's family, that they did take enormous risks in a lot of ways. But yeah, so look, I don't know. I have my moments. I try.
Tell us about some, because I can think of a couple of specific issues that you've campaigned very hard on.
Yeah, well, same-sex marriage was the big one here, it was really just because the public sentiment was in our favour. But, there were 22 bills in 13 years, so it was various sort of politicians who had a very strong agenda in terms of the culture wars, who were determined not to let it happen. And then, sort of by hook or by crook, it ended up being a public vote, which got quite ugly. And that was when I really decided to step up. I'd already been doing a lot of stuff before that anyway, but that was one of those moments where I was like, I just thought there should have been a bit more regulation around the whole thing, instead of just... I'm not a huge fan of direct democracy. They do it very differently in Ireland. They have more protections around it for people. I felt, a lot of us felt we were a bit thrown to the wolves, really. But, that was something I was very happy to... just seemed to me an obvious thing to do, really. Just a public service.
And what kind of pushback do you get from people? I mean, I guess you have the trolls here too.
Oh, it's actually impossible to say anything anymore, which is another thing when you're writing, that everything is so weaponised. No one gives anyone the benefit of the doubt. Decisions are made about what your politics and what your views are. They think you're just a cookie cutter, sort of, you become a straw person for everyone. And so it's got incredibly ugly, and most of it I get is fat shaming, actually, which is interesting. Maybe there's not sufficient laws to protect fat people, I think. But I won't go me for being gay anymore, because I might sue them. It's look, the world at the moment. But I'm a firm believer that there are powerful people who want the world to be confused, and who want there to be disinformation and misinformation, because that is the way to disrupt democracy and destroy it. So really, we all know it at the moment. It's a very difficult time to speak up, but it's such an important time to speak up. But there's so many issues that you just can't. You can't, because there's very little room for nuance. And I think it's hard in comedy, which is where I come from. That it's hard in comedy, but having an opinion or saying anything about anything is incredibly difficult now.
You are, I guess, a Melbourne heroine. You are Melbourne's home girl. You're their local celeb.
I'm from Liverpool. No, actually, going to work back there like that.
What I really want to know is more about this city. This is my second visit here. As you say, you're known for your coffee, you're known for your good food, you're known for your laneways. But if you were explaining this city to somebody who'd never been here before, how would you go about it?
Look, Melbourne is like, Sydney's all razzle-dazzle. I love Sydney. I don't get into the Melbourne-Sydney rivalry. First of all, I think Sydney is a stunning city. But it's like, when you meet two people, and one of them's like immediately charismatic and gorgeous, and the other one's sort of shy and a bit quiet, but a slow burn. I'd say Melbourne is that latter one. It's more of a slow burn, but it's been quite interesting. Quite a lot of people from overseas commented to me that they went to Sydney and then came to Melbourne and just preferred Melbourne, like loved Melbourne, which I'm sort of a bit like, well, you know, we've got crappy beaches and no harbour, but okay, all right. It's something about the feel of it, I think. There's perhaps a warmth, although I find Sydney people very warm as well. So I think it's hard when you live in the city to know exactly what it is, but I have noticed that people do seem to really respond to it really well.
I mean, some of the other people I've spoken to have talked to me about the sort of deep culture here, that it is an incredibly artistic, cultured, of course, the city of literature too.
Yeah, well, we're big supporters of the arts. We really turn out for the arts and for sport. That's Melbourne. We're at Melbourne, which seems, and you have to call it Melbourne, by the way, don't call it Melbourne. Don't say that. But yeah, we, attendances for at the art galleries, for musical theatre, all those sort of things. We get out and we go to those things. Of course, COVID hit very hard because Melbourne's not as much of an outdoorsy city as Sydney is. It's much more of an indoorsy. But, you know, it's got a slight New Yorky vibe. Do you think that's right? I would say a little bit-ish. And yeah, it's quite a cool city, I think, actually, Melbourne.
I would totally agree. I think it's completely cool. And it's, I think, officially a city of literature, the second one after Edinburgh. So, I mean, it's wonderfully kind of bookish. And I was really just looking around, and I suppose two things struck me. One was the really quite great Asian influence. Mm-hmm. And the other, which makes it different from Britain, but not so much the US, was the visibility of the white working class.
Oh, you feel like there is a visibility of the... I mean, I certainly think it's become a much more culturally diverse country compared to when we came here in 1965. I mean, it was so white bread. So it's far more culturally diverse. But the influence of Asian foods is fantastic in this country. Like Chinese restaurants that are really... I remember I ate at one of what was reputedly the best Chinese restaurant in London. I was like, you what? So, no, like you got flour drum here. There's a whole lot of like really stunning, and that just flows into everything because we're in Asia, you know. So the diversity of food and the terrific fresh, the produce here is great, you know. So yeah, food is really. I have to say, whenever I travel, and, you know, you can go to some of the great cuisines, but just for your basic kind of like every cafe you go to, there's really, really, really good coffee. Have you had the Magic? Have you had a Magic? That's a Melbourne thing. So it is the perfect ratio of whatever sort of variety of milk you might have to a ristretto coffee. And it is delicious. It's like a 3/4 latte, but it's, you know, very silky. And so Melbourne, that's a very uniquely Melbourne thing. You just say, I'll have a, you know, like a soy Magic or a whatever. So there you go, a little bit of insider.
I want to talk about comedy and Australia because you do seem to have a unique kind of humour. And of course, as you say, comedy is where you come from and you've worked in it for decades now. Do you think that Australian humour is different from US humour, from British humour, from Japanese humour?
Well, I think actually, interestingly, there's becoming a globalisation of comedy in a way that it used to be that we just imported particularly from the UK and from the US. But now, I mean, Kath and Kim actually was one of our most successful comedy exports. And there's a lot of comedians who are going back over the pond. I think we tend to have a quite rough sort of treat them mean because you like them. But that's struggling a bit at the moment because, of course, of the current climate, and a lot of which I completely agree with. Political correctness is not just a dirty word, but we do have to make sure we don't lose our ability to laugh at ourselves. It's the greatest gift, you know, having been both of my parents' deaths. Anyone who's lived through that will know that what a a gift a sense of your own ridiculousness is. My mother had a terrific sense of her own ridiculousness, and it saw her right through to the very end. So I hope we don't lose that. We're stirrers. I mean, typically it's been, no doubt comes from that thing of being I can't quite believe that we still have the king as our head of government. It's like, oh my God, you know. I feel the connection because I was born in Britain, you know what I mean? Like, it makes sense to me, but we're so in Asia here. And I think that's going to be a really interesting thing, actually, seeing as the demographics change. I think another thing is people don't ever quite give enough credit for the terrific sly wit of First Nations humour has impacted. So I think there's a lot of, in the roots of Australian comedy, the Irish and the First Nations people, I think, deserve a lot more credit than they get.
That's absolutely fascinating. What direction do you think Australian comedy is going in? And is it encompassing all of that? Is it becoming more diverse?
There's a lot more... Oh, yeah, it is becoming a lot more diverse. You know, I'm probably off on a different tangent a bit, really, at the moment, to be honest. I went and wrote my kids' books and doing more sort of acting gigs at the moment. And so I wouldn't say I'm right on the... Look... When I have a night off, I'll go and watch a turgid... You know, I'm Polish, you know. I like a turgid, really sort of soul... Not just searching, but soul-searing, scraping drama. It's that Eastern European misery, you know. Give me a bit of that. So I wouldn't say I'm completely up with where things are at the moment, but absolutely there's whole new generations coming through that are much more diverse. I mean, it will increase just by force of the fact that the population is changing, you know. And that's the thing when you have a country based on migration. But I just wish, you know, there are some fantastic First Nations Indigenous shows. I just wish that more credit was given for that influence because, yeah, the droll humour of First Nations people is hilarious.
You mentioned your kids' books. They have fantastic titles.
Well, they say write what you know. And so Timmy the Ticked-Off Pony is, can I swear? And this, all right, oh, great. Because, you know, I'm reasonably good-natured, but I have me moments when my blood sugar's low. And one of my best friends to me, who actually is the one who coined the phrase foxy moron, my friend Kristen, said to me, oh, God, when you're in those moods, you're like a little fucked-off Shetland pony, you know. And this other friend of mine, she went, oh, my God, that's right, you know, sort of like with a round rump, but that little vicious streak, you know, that only Shetland ponies, they're so cute, but, oh, they'll kick the shit out of you. And she had a Shetland pony called Timmy, and it was going to be called, of course, Timmy the fucked-off Shetland pony, but you can't, you know, we're not quite there yet. And then they would say, write what you know. And just this sort of obsession with Insta fame at the moment, really, it's just the attention economy that we're all living in. I never thought that was what I was doing. When we were coming up, it was that you were creating shows or you were making people laugh, but it wasn't about getting attention. Whereas now the whole thing about, you know, getting eyeballs, you know, just even that way that it's described. So, you know, Timmy is he's just about to reach peak fame, and just as his little hoof hits the spotlight on the red carpet, he has a bit of bowel incontinence and his career is ruined. So it's been fun, you know, like when I was working in the women's refuges, I was the one that used to tell stories to the kids. And that was actually kind of when I, in a lot of ways, got the confidence to end up going into comedy, because so much of my time was spent mucking around with the kids and telling them stories. And that was when I discovered if you put a fart joke in there, they're yours for life, you know. And it was just the best fun. And so I just sort of wanted to return to that, really, that sense of silly, naughty storytelling.
Tell me about your acting work that you're doing at the moment.
Well, actually, at the moment, I've sort of diversified a bit into... I did a health doco for the ABC, Magda's Big National Health Check. So I'm sort of moving into all these different... I hate to do just one thing, you know. So at the moment, I'm doing a bit of doco presenting, and this was a sort of an overview of the state of the nation's health, really, because we have a really high rate of chronic illness. Like 50% of Australians have some form of chronic illness, including me. and it's why is that? And what are the systemic issues that make it? I mean, you look at this country; it's meant to be, the outdoorsy, the bronzed Aussie, that whole sort of thing. What are the systemic things that are making it difficult? So it's a whole lot of things, like, of course, ultra-processed foods, sugar, the way things are sold, packaged, all that kind of thing. So that was really fascinating to do. So I'm doing some more in that sort of realm, and acting gigs at the moment. I don't think there's any on the cards. No, I've got a couple of... I'm much more into sort of writing books and doing... I don't know, I've got this real taste for realism at the moment. Sometimes I find acting, pretending, just too fucking ridiculous for a grown-up to be doing. No?
But also, isn't it about the state of the world right now? Everything feels so serious that you think it's almost too difficult to go and do something that isn't looking at the awful situation we're in.
Yeah. Well, look... Yeah, I am writing something at the moment, and things even that... I'm writing a follow-up to the memoir, actually, but, God, things that were okay to write even a few months ago, suddenly the world has shifted so dramatically that it doesn't come across in the same way. So knowing how, the state of the world at the moment, I think, to be really honest, I think most of my efforts at the moment are just quietly... with various people I know behind the scenes trying to create social cohesion, because I think it's actually impossible to do it online, but just in person-to-person conversations with groups of people trying to actually get back to what are the values that we all have in common and just stop the boat from rocking, at least in this country if we can. I don't know, what else can be done, but, I seem to have turned into... much more of the political animal that I was when I was younger, actually, which is, knocked me down with a feather. I didn't know that was going to happen. And maybe, sort of circling back to reckoning, I think it is really informed by my family's experience and my mother on the other side, Scottish-Irish, but whatever I can do to try and help, steady the ship of state in any way, I think quite a lot of us are doing that, because it's so... feels incredibly precarious, doesn't it, the world?
It really does. I wonder how divided Australia feels.
Obviously we've just recently had the referendum on The Voice, which didn't go the way that many of us hoped it would. I think it's really important to not make rash judgments about what that means, actually, because it was a more complex piece of legislation that I think people had their reservations about, like what exactly the no vote means is hard to know. There does seem to be... we've got some of the same things going on here, that's coming from internationally, but it never... I think lifestyle just sort of like muffles everything, It's like, hopefully that will continue to be the case, that, oh, look, I'd just rather go for a swim or a surf or that kind of attitude, which used to seem like such a boring thing, now seems like an extraordinary virtue and a great blessing. We don't get as hot-headed here, but it certainly is here. It came out during COVID, and then it got quite ugly during The Voice as well. But I think the sort of like the solid rump of Australians are quite sensible, quite pragmatic, quite sensible, and you've got the extremes who will get out in the streets and cause problems. But I think, I don't know if this is wishful thinking, but I think I'm right. If you put the two things together, you look at the strength of the vote for marriage equality, which was made easier in a lot of ways because it was a non-binding survey, so people didn't feel like if they voted for it, they were locked into anything that couldn't be undone. And that showed a sort of, progressive, tolerant sentiment. I think the oppositional forces, which was the same bloody people, they just trot out every time. They trotted out for marriage equality, and their agenda was just to sow confusion, and they just were more skilled at it this second time around. So, but I think I'm loath to make hasty declarations about what things mean, because what the entrails of that particular process, who's going to read those and know exactly what it means and then say this is the type of people we are? I think you've got to be careful with that sort of thing, because I just think you can't make the assumptions. And for example, one of the things that people sort of said a lot was, difference with marriage equality is that everyone knows a gay person and not a lot of people know Aboriginal people. And I was like, people have a gay person in their family. And I'm like, well, yeah, speaking as one of those gay people in the family, it wasn't our presence in the family that changed the attitude. It was that the lens was changed, that the culture changed. It was shows like Modern Family, it was Ellen DeGeneres, it was all of that meant that families saw us differently. So I think it's really important to interrogate very carefully what things mean. That this assumption that, it's just because Australians don't all know Aboriginal people. It's like, no, we don't know. I hope there's really, really rigorous research into it and questioning of, you start off with the wrong premise, you get the wrong conclusion, don't you? So, I don't know. I think there's good reason for hope, I think, in that it can be hard-headed, but it is sort of pragmatic. There's something pragmatic about Australians, I think. The fact that we made short shrift of two of the worst Prime Ministers, Tony Abbott and Scott Morrison, that says something.
You're talking about hope, and so just a quick look to the future. Your new book, you're working on it now. Yeah. You do feel hopeful, despite the state of the world. When can we expect the new book?
I don't know. It is hard to write. I mean, hopefully soon. I'm deep in the writing process at the moment, so I'm not going to say too much about it. But I am going to say that hope is constructed. It's not just winging a prayer and hoping about hope. It's actually doing stuff. A lot of the doing of stuff to create hope, I think, is to lay down your arms in some ways. I think that there is a form of politics, which honestly, when I was working at Women's Refuge, I saw it then too, this extremism that will not brook any disagreement with it. And I am very inclined to push back against that. I think it was destructive then, and I think it's destructive now. So I don't think that you just let hope happen. I think you make it happen.
Magda Szubanski, thank you. Magda's memoir Reckoning is published by Text and it's out in all good bookstores. Her children's series, Timmy, the Ticked-Off Pony, is also available, published by Scholastic Press. You've been listening to Meet the Writers, thanks to the production team of Steph Chungu and Flynn Simons. And you can download this show and previous episodes from our website or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.